Live streaming is on.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen of the world. My name is Jerry Fielka. It's February 28, 2021. It's an honor and a pleasure to have us with Clinton Ignatoff, who's helping tonight. Thank you, Clinton, and he'll be back. And so honored and what a pleasure to have you, Bruce Wagner, with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jerry.
Bruce, what's the best thing for a human being?
Well, I think what everyone sort of desires is peace, serenity,
Yeah.
And that's a difficult one to come. They usually say it's a simple thing, but it isn't easy.
It's a great answer. I rarely get that answer, and I appreciate that. What's your favorite form of information, how it comes into you?
My favorite form is, there's a letting go and things come to you intuitively. That's how most of my books are written. This idea of control is, I think, an impediment. It's an impediment. If you're talking about I think someone's calling you and I'm getting it on my, I'm sorry about that.
That's all right.
Yeah, is there a way to, okay, someone said bonjour.
No, Bruce, that was great. Control is impediment, and then control.
Yeah, if you're talking about the more mundane forms of information, I'm on overload like everyone else, but the Daily Mail is awesome.
Nice. So you're saying daily physical post office mail or
no, the newspaper, the Daily Mail. My friends and I are completely obsessed with it. And then of course I was listening to Howard Stern. He's obsessed with it. But the one peculiar thing about the Daily Mail is that either they can't spell or they absolutely could care less about spelling. There's so many typographical errors and misspellings in headlines. I don't even consider it a harbinger of things to come because there's already a kind of mass illiteracy. But with the Daily Mail, there's almost an exultant obliviousness to spelling and punctuation, and we're just enthralled by it. My friends and I, we constantly do screenshots and circle headlines, and so there's all kinds of ways to get information. I mean, often you get them by almost by tom-tom, subliminally. You'll overhear something, and then 3 hours later, you'll read something that echoes or bolsters what you heard almost subliminally. So, but the key thing is that this idea that we can control the access or the absorption of information is an impediment because it gets in the way. You translate that in a literal way to the creative process, and you're finished.
Yeah. That was really good. Let me. Whoops! I'm getting an echo. Okay, so you can hear me okay. One is I.F. Stone said typos are worse than fascism. So I love that you brought that up.
Not anymore.
And then, just to be clear, you're educating me. Daily Mail is a physical newspaper or an online newspaper?
Online.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'll learn about it. I appreciate that. And so why do you think humans collect information?
Why do they collect information?
Yeah.
Well, it's always to orient oneself, And it actually, what is the information we're collecting is the key question, because the social order requires a certain consensus reality. Yeah. And it used to be where we read the same newspapers, listened to the same newscasts. This was back in our day, Jerry. Yeah. And there was an alignment, a kind of sameness, and that allowed consensus. And this is what they used to call water cooler conversation. I don't think water coolers exist anymore. But people talking about the same things, people talking about the same television shows, laughing at the same bits in a communal or social setting. And now it's no secret. In fact, it's a bit of a trope that there is too much information, and much of it is at odds with our own, let's say, personal reality. But then there will be hundreds of thousands of people that are sharing a consensus reality that has nothing to do with ours, you see. And that goes on both sides, left, right, extremist, centrist. So, but it's always been to orient one in society, you know. It's a wonderful thing to tune out. You know, one of the things that's difficult when I write my books is sometimes I have to sink very, very deep into social media. And I have a proclivity for it, you know. I don't mind it, but after a while one feels you know, that one's in some kind of ICU, you know, being bombarded with information that is insignificant yet tantalizing. Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, that's that you're really evoking, and you really get what we're talking about. But not to go on too many tangents, is it the desire or need for humans to collect information more innate or more invented?
Oh, I think it's innate as animals. It's our instinct. The problem is that the manner in which we collect information becomes perverted or corrupt. You know, this is why, hearkening back to what I was saying about intuition is so important. My dear friend Gavin de Becker wrote a book called The Gift of Fear. And that book talks about this innate sense that we have, this intuitive sense we have, that is something that protects us. The way that we process information is often intuitive rather than literal. It's not reading the New Yorker, you know. It's much more powerful than that, and it's something that animals possess.
Really well put. Do thoughts create emotions?
Well, certainly a thought can be evocative of an emotional time, you know. But we have to define even emotion, you know. What do we mean by that? Do you know? What do you mean by it?
Yeah, I think when you use the words intuitive, like you have, that that is more what is percept as opposed to concept. So emotions are in general fear or happiness or feelings. Well, maybe I'll follow it up with this question, which again, it's both, and it depends. And I love how you're going deeper into the question than the surface. That's really what I'm after.
And it's purely accidental.
Thank God. But do you think your observations of human beings that they're more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
Well, my feeling is that feeling that would be it. We are feeling beings. We are sentient beings is really the phrase. This this thinking is tends to get one into a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
That's not just to say thinking needs to be banished. That's so simplistic. But the emphasis is on thinking, not feeling. So people forget how to feel because they're thinking too hard about how they should feel. So I suppose kind of a sub theme of themes of what I'm saying to you tonight is that that overthink and the demands of the social order cloud the purity of the sentient being and distort the sentient being. So you have you can just observe some of the homeless people who are because that's an easy illustrative example of feeling gone amok. Those, in other words, who I'm talking about are the schizophrenic, those who are doing rapid, repetitive motions and communing with something that is not seen by consensus reality. So there's a lot of ways that feeling can become perverted and punished, not just by the social order, but by the demands that are put upon the individual.
Yeah, I see it every day when I spend a lot of time at the corner of Venice and Lincoln Boulevard waiting for the light to change on my bicycle, and the homeless person's standing there with a big smile, and everybody's in their car, all tens. And I goes, what's right with this picture? And what you said evoked, Captain Beefheart said, I had too much to think. And in fact, Bridget Bardot nails it. She says, when I make love, I don't think. And I'm like, good luck. So that was beautiful. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
Oh, I never pursue meaning, ever. And happiness is, is I think what I was talking about is serenity, which comes from a profound inner silence. It's not difficult. I mean, it's difficult to achieve, but this idea of happiness is almost almost an obscenity because it has so many different interpretations. It's the same as asking someone, what does God look like? If you have an idea of what God looks like, to me, there's something amiss. So the idea of happiness, the fundamentals, of course, the roof over one's head, food to eat, and protection from the elements. Those are basics and givens. The idea of serenity is a different thing. But certainly the culture happiness revolves around material things, and fame. This is very difficult to escape. I mean, I've mentioned this before, but there's a Buddhist story about one of the most famous of ascetic monks, cave-dwelling monks. And he was possessed with the idea of being the most famous cave-dwelling monk, the most famous hermit. And some Buddhist texts have said that the idea of fame, self-interest really, is a more difficult concept to break than anything else.
Wow, that is deep. That is really, really important. You understand my stupid questions. The next one is, Bruce, does the brain more detect consciousness or create consciousness?
You know, these are the problem with these questions is that the semantics can be skewed in any direction. I think the brain is consciousness. I don't think it creates consciousness or anything else. It simply is.
Yeah.
The brain has achieved that very noisy silence. We've made it noisy. But yeah, I don't. One thing I really don't. I never look for is meaning, and when I begin to break things down, I know that I'm having a bad day.
Yeah. What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
I think you need. What's that? There's so many well-known television physicists now.
Yeah.
You know, I'm. You know, I don't know. The idea of the speed of light is beyond my comprehension. Yeah. Someone sent me on the internet something the other day that showed a segment of the universe, just a small segment, and immediately the mind is crippled. It was trillions of these things are beyond comprehension. The idea of as I get older, the speed of thought is definitely less than the speed of light. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. No, I get that.
It's the speed of that light you were waiting for to change at Lincoln. You know, on Lincoln.
But that's like the gap is where the action is. As I'm waiting, I can go, wow, what a time to take a deep breath and think and appreciate life. So Audre Lorde, the poet, says you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rainer responded, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest applying those quotes or not?
Well, again, I don't know the context. The master's house, does that mean, you know, that could mean consensus reality, you know? You talk about the White House. Well, what is the White House? The White House is a construct, you know? So what is the master's house? And of course, at this point in our culture, the master's house implies you know, those who rule. You know, the idea of disruption versus dismantling is interesting to me. But I don't know the exactly what they're talking about. You know, there's that famous story about Picasso that he before he it's a cliche now, but before he did his abstract work, he was an exquisite line drawer. He could, without leaving the paper, these gorgeous portraits that one can Google. So, in a sense, you have to learn your scales in order to be Eric Satie. You know, so there's no path that is exact. And that's another thing that people are very linear, you know. Yeah. You cannot overthrow the master. You can't dismantle the master's house with the tools of the man. These are all sort of they don't make much sense to me. You know, they're kind of, they're not platitudes, but they're kind of mottos in a sense that sound profound, but to me are not. So the idea is disruption. In other words, when I was a boy and I was reading authors, one of them, there were a couple of writers that at a very young age, maybe 13, I was interested in. Hubert Selby Jr. was one. Kenneth Patchen was another, an American poet. They were both doing disruptive things that I, as a boy, reading authors like O. Henry or Bret Hart or Robert Louis Stevenson, had never seen before. Selby did things with punctuation, altered paragraphs in a way that was disruptive in such a way that it almost nauseated me with a kind of later a kind of ecstatic nausea. Patchen was doing drawings in the middle of prose. So these sound very anodyne now, but at the time I was completely bewildered. So that, to me, those are, I mean, Hubert Selby Jr. was a masterful prose writer, but at some point he started using slashes instead of apostrophes, and then paragraphs would break up for emphasis, actually in a poetic fashion. So what would you say, were those the tools of the master that he had hammered or melted and reformed? You know, it's like David Cronenberg's tools, gynecological tools for mutant women in Dead Ringers. You know, they're exquisite and artful looking creations, but were they the tools of the master, or are they still? So all of these things are layered for me, and I try to avoid platitudinous mantras, you know.
No, that was well done, and really, they're just jumping off points. You get it. You basically talked a lot and conveyed something to me from that. And you put the questions into the context you want. I don't really want to put them into a context. I can a little if you want, but you're
no, it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah, and you know, the mottos thing is right, because I just, you know, rattle off all these cute quotes, and it was from McLuhan that I learned. He took Browning's quote, "Our reach should exceed our grasp," or "What is heaven for?" And he reworded it and said, "Our reach should exceed our grasp," or "What is a metaphor?" So, you know, this is like, to me, the quotes aren't there so much for the epiphany or the enlightenment you get from the one-liner. It's how you're going to remake, not you, but how one is going to remake it, or, you know, swindle it, or riddle it, or make a new riddle. So, you know, that's what the word disrupt was really good. Now, Bruce, what do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
I worry that I'll worry.
That's great.
You know, it's such a strange, I mean, this life is so dreamlike as it is. And this idea that we spend a third of our lives in sleep and dreaming, whether we recall our dreams or not. And this idea that each night one partakes of this ritual, this communal ritual as the human animal, to enter the mysteries of sleep is enough to set my teeth on edge.
That is so. It really. At my mom's.
I look forward to oblivion, though. I do. I look forward to oblivion. I'm one of these people. If I have a a medical test and or some kind of little surgery or even a big one, which I haven't had yet, where they have to put you out. I look forward to oblivion. You know, I've made friends with oblivion. You know.
Well put. At my mom's wake service, and everybody thought she worried too much, I said, there's a lot of people in this room that think Dolores, they worry that she worried too much. And I said, there's a fine line between worry and concern. She was just concerned about this. And you just said, oh, no, worry will destroy you. It's like, well, what's the difference between worry and concern? So, Bruce, McLuhan learned from a poet that artists are the antenna of the race. They broadcast the hidden psychic effects of the things we invent. Spoken word, printed word, electronic word, cell phone. They broadcast these hidden psychic effects so that we can learn to cope with what we don't like about our inventions. And so his big probe was, well, why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects, even though we can turn to the artist to reveal them to us?
Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of invented things?
Yeah, of anything invented, whether it's tactile or not. I mean, we invented religion or we invented philosophy. You can't hold in your hand. Or we invented spoken word, printed word, bulldozers, cell phones. Everything we invent has these hidden psychic effects, like they call them unintended consequences. But we can look to artists, writers, filmmakers to sort of reveal them to us so that we can learn to cope with them. Why do we still ignore the hidden psychic effects?
You know, I personally don't feel that a true artist have an agenda, you know, other than as you said, to be antennae, you know. And artists have been put upon, they've been censored, they've been exterminated, but so have so many other groups of people. So the older I get, the less I think, you know, and the less I think about all of these. Not that it's not intriguing, the things you're bringing up, but I feel that I don't have that much time left on the planet, you know. Relatively, whether it's 10 years where the antenna is working, you know, or whether that is cut short by dementia or stroke or an accident, you know. Impossible to know these things. So this idea of silence becomes more urgent, of this timeless silence, which is really serenity. You know, I spent some time in India. There was a guru there who did something that they call satsang. This was in Mumbai, where people would come from all across the world to sit at his feet and ask him questions. And of course, the two most prominent questions were, how can I help the world? You know, and the other one was, how do I achieve enlightenment? And his answer about enlightenment was so drastically simple. He said, an enlightened person is someone whom, when something terrible happens to, they may not feel good, but they don't take it personally. And when something glorious happens, they may feel good, but they don't take it personally. So these are almost impossible goals to achieve, you know. But I do find that I think less about cause and effect, and more about oblivion as I get older.
Yeah, that was good. It was like McLuhan's favorite line was, "The Balinese have no word for art. They do everything as well as they can." But
That's lovely.
we're
That's
going to
lovely.
talk. Yeah, that is. We're going to talk about intention, but it was that question was more about, well, you covered it, but fine. Can you, Bruce? Can you conjure up your earliest memory or one of them?
Yeah, I think I was 3 years old and living in Atlanta, Georgia, and the memory was being by the side of the road with my older sisters, and them introducing me to honeysuckle, this flower that I could suck the sweetness from. Now, memory and the dream of this life being what they are. This may be an anecdote that that I pulled from somewhere else. You know,
Yeah.
This idea that we are court stenographers of our lives is just faulty to me. But that's an early memory,
Yeah.
earliest, I would say.
Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
Well, memory, you know, when you have when you awaken from a particularly tumultuous night of dreaming, and you remember certain things and you fail to write them down, let's say, but you tell your partner or you tell someone during the day, which is of course the deadly thing to tell someone the dream you had. You know, people just shut down, shut off, and by the end of the day you remember nothing. So if you use that as as something analogous to this life, you know, Tim Leary's quote, you know, that he's discovered a wonderful new drug. It's called dementia. You know, the older I get, the more I want to forget, you know, and the memory is so faulty. This is such a truism when they say eyewitnesses are the least reliable in a court case. We are terrible eyewitnesses. And you can make that I, not EYE, just I. We are terrible witnesses of ourselves. Terrible. You know, all the time, and I don't feel that you know, I'm of course having the aging process that you probably are having. My memory is the alacrity is not as significant as it was, but it is there still for the very complex architecture of my novels. And I do not, absolutely do not care. I have I don't become anxious when I can't remember things or someone's name. Or, you know, the other day, someone in a pharmacy said to me, she heard me say my name to the pharmacist, and she said, "Bruce Wagner, we used to date." And she pulled her mask down. I remembered nothing about it. And I said, "Well, how did we meet?" She told me. I remembered nothing. Now, this is not necessarily something that would not happen to someone in their 30s or 40s. I don't know, was I impaired? You know, I went through a lot of years where I was using narcotics and I was impaired. So was it the narcotics? Was it selective memory? Was it that she was not that significant a person that I met, or that she was somehow exaggerating using the word date when it was a coffee? I just, it's impossible to know. So there does come a kind of peace when one reconciles the idea that the transcript of this life is you know, the old phrase where it comes from, ad vita, which is we are not writing, we are being written, you know.
Yeah.
So we are being written. So who am I to suddenly decide that my memories are accurate? Is there such a thing? You know, my memories were impressions.
Really well put. Thank you. Because I've learned the best way to explain Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce is how the American Indians go from tent to tent in the morning, and they go like, I go up to Bruce's tent and I go, well, what'd you dream last night, Bruce? And you go, well, I was blah, blah, blah. And I goes, well, then what happened? Blah, blah, blah. So I'm the co-creator of your dream. So we create your dream together by the questions I ask. So that's how this phenomenon of reading a book out loud with a group
just by coming to the tent, they're part of your dream. They don't have to say a word, you know.
That's really well put. And so can you tell me an early role model or someone in your immediate family who had an impact on you, and just briefly, what was that impact?
In my immediate family,
and then the second part is outside your immediate family. So just
there, you know, it wouldn't be my immediate family, you know.
Okay.
But I think, you know, one of the things, whether I've been burdened or blessed by it, is that I was always a writer. You know, from when I was 10 or 11, my closest friend and I would steal books, and I had in the solitariness of my bedroom, I had shelves of stolen books. So those were my counselors, so to speak. But then I became aware that certain writers who I extolled were living. And the one I think that made the deepest impression on me was Henry Miller. Henry Miller revolutionized my life as a writer. There were those that did the same, such as Kafka. But Kafka was a blurry photograph from another time, another planet. Whereas Henry Miller, I learned, was married to a woman who owned a boutique that was a block away from my house. And I would pass it on the way to high school. And I eventually met Henry Miller. And Hubert Selby Jr., I had read a book of his called The Room, which is one of the most, I would say, one of the darkest books in literature. And later, I was actually gratified to read that Selby felt the same about that book. It was somehow radioactive. And it made such a deep impression on me. And I remember a friend and I looked in the phone book. This was back in the day when people's names were in phone books. And there was Hubert Selby Jr. and his street address. He lived across, do you remember the Bodhi tree in West Hollywood? He lived right across the street from it. And we knocked on his door. We were probably 15, trembling. He was very gracious. I think probably equally annoyed and impressed that such young people had been so moved by his work, you know. So then, you know, my father was really an absent man, an alcoholic, and a difficult man. And my parents divorced when I was 13. So I think much of my life was spent looking for replacements in a sense. So Selby, Miller fit the bill. And later I became close to men who were father figures, in some cases also brothers. Cronenberg is one of those. So the idea, speaking of dismantling the master's house, I think I had an implicit and vivid thought that I had to do something disruptive. And that really, whether one succeeds or not, it is a way that one clears the table of debris and finds one's own voice, makes one's own meal, so to speak, whether that meal is tasty or something that only a few people can sink their teeth into is another question entirely. But rather than imitate, which is something I was an excellent mimic in terms of writing, and I think I realized quickly. I used to play the classical piano when I was a boy, and I realized after a few years of very hard work that I simply didn't have it. It was pointless for me to continue. I think something told me that I had that talent to write, but everything depended on my breaking away. So my life has been a series of disruptive acts. I dropped out of high school when I think the dropout rate was probably 0.01%. And I periodically threw all of my possessions away and hitchhiked up north towards San Francisco, where I used to live when I was 5, 6, 7, 8. I think I did some deliberately anarchic things because I was so uncomfortable with the idea of the linear, being on a path, even if that path was to make my own tools to tear down the master's house. Any kind of plan was obscene to me. So I did court oblivion, and sometimes through oblivion comes some kind of resolution. So that's my story in terms of who made an impact on me, And then, of course, once comforted, I was comforted as an anguished, oversensitive adolescent by Rachmaninoff, things that were very dramatic and even sentimental. I mean, to this day, Dickens was such a huge influence on me. To this day, I have not read all of Dickens because I'm so staggered by Dickens. It's not that I don't want to finish Dickens, because one never finishes Dickens, but the act of reading Dickens is painful to me because I'm so exquisitely attuned to Dickens that it's somewhat agonizing to me.
Yeah. Bruce, you really summarized that well. I appreciate that. Were you raised a particular religion, and did you check out, or, what's your history in that regard?
Well, we were, I'm Jewish, and we celebrated Christmas, over Hanukkah. I was bar mitzvahed, but no, I had no religious upbringing, really at all.
Do you pray?
I pray through my work, this idea, that same guru I was telling you about that I met in India said that when he encounters anyone who meditates for more than an hour, he gets very suspect. Meditation is not for everyone, it's been of tremendous help for many people, but it's not something that I do. So if we say prayer or meditation, if we make those two words the same, one meditates when one enters silence. And when I'm working on a book, if it's a very good day, I forget the self and I inhabit the book, and it's a very musical kind of process. It's an infatuation with words and characters. So that is prayer for me.
If God does exist, what do you want God to tell you after you die?
You know, though, any questions about God, I strenuously don't entertain, because you know, these insects, you know, we're so less than rocks and crystals and trees, you know, that these insects have the arrogance and audacity to even entertain the idea of something that is incomprehensible. Is, to me, it's a deal breaker, you know.
I like it. Really well put. And do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
Well, you know, if you say, you turn that on its end and you say, do joyous people exist? You know, so for me, one can't help but see a malignancy, let's say, you know. So would you call cancer evil? You know, all you have to do is scroll through the Daily Mail. You know, you'll see an article just a few days ago. It was a woman whose rich husband found her a bull giraffe to kill. And the husband later said that they found one that the person whose land that it was on said it had just a few months to live. And this woman shot and killed this giraffe and cut its heart out and held its heart with a huge Kardashian smile, you know. So would one say that that's evil, or is that a malignancy, you know? I think the problem with that word evil is it suddenly puts you in religion camp. Do you know what I mean? So I think that cliche is true, that whatever one can imagine has happened, you know? So these are, that human beings are capable of pornographic violence against others and themselves is simply part of what it is to be human, you know. But they're also capable of absolute grandiose and operatic gestures of compassion, you know.
Yeah. This one I set up with a few modern thinkers' thoughts. The question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurais. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. Fellini said, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is, how do you, Bruce, advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you specifically react to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Well, you know, he would have had to be speaking about an enemy of his, you know. So you acknowledge them even by something so sage as that. Do you know what I mean? I feel that again, one has to, what kind of enemy, you know?
Yeah.
Is the enemy someone who is stalking you with the view to kill you, or is the enemy a friend who says terrible things about you behind your back? You know, so there are different strategies for those things. But you know, this idea, which is a Christian idea or a Buddhist idea, to love thine enemy, it sounds to me the best strategy, but certainly one that I'm not capable of.
That's Ram Dass said back in the days. He says, I'm having a real hard time loving George Bush.
Yeah, did you ever meet him?
Yeah, I met him just briefly, but I wish I could have spent. I mean, the two documentaries on him are so, it's like you're meeting him. But I wish I go ahead.
I was in Maui, and a friend of mine knew him. I also knew his personal physician, and we went over to his house and spent a few hours there. And he had an altar, filled with deities, and there was a little bust of Trump.
That is great. That helps me update my thing. That's beautiful. Because I mean, a very, very special man, and we're lucky that he was on the earth when he was, and we could share his book or his talks or his films. And James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin over 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I could go outside and see a real tree? Years later, Faulkner said sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Well, I think that there's great value in the condensed drama, when people talk to me about writing, the first question that I really ask them, because so often they have concerns, can I write? Or is this marketable? Or how do I get an agent? All of these questions. And the key question is, does writing give you pleasure? Yeah. So this idea, it's pithy, what Joyce said, but it's meaningless. To me, the pleasure of seeing a condensed and pyromaniacal play by Strindberg is one that I may not experience in 3 years on this, on this planet. Life moves much slower than that, unless one's catapulted into melodrama. But melodrama is messy and doesn't have the engineering that great works of art have, the sublime engineering. So to me, it's pithy, but doesn't hold water.
Yeah,
he was blind anyway, wasn't he, Joyce?
He was blind, and in a great film.
Why the fuck would he want to be a projectionist anyway? He's a masochist,
But a great film writer, P. Adam Sidley said, he didn't say that. I goes, well, I'll add allegedly then. He allegedly said that.
Yeah, we'll have to go on Snopes and find that out. It doesn't sound like something he would say.
Yeah, because that's what books do. But anyways, it is a different medium, and Einstein was going to make Ulysses and blah, blah, blah. So here's the thing. You brought up that word condensed drama. I like that word condensed because John Cage had a term. He was inspired by The Wake and McLuhan. Actually, McLuhan told Cage to explore The Wake, and Cage came up with this thing called writing through. You condense something and you satirize it. I goes, I can relate. That's Mad Magazine. So, can satire be destructive?
In what way destructive do you mean?
Well, there you go. See, you know how to answer questions really good. So, satire. Swift compared satire to a mirror in which people could see every face but their own. But if you're a cartoonist and you do a certain cartoon in some country and they come and kill you, well, that could be destructive because maybe you think dying's bad. But a writer who worked for writing jokes for Robin Williams told me that's the job of satire, to be destructive.
Well, so, I think you mean destructive to the satirist. I don't think you mean satire is destructive, because you don't. I mean, they just canceled Dr. Seuss. I'm being serious because of the racial undertones. So the idea, it's not the act of writing that is threatening. It's those who act on the writing. You can find any reason to slaughter someone, and it doesn't have to be Charlie Hebdo. It can be it can be Mark Twain. We can throw Mark Twain in the incinerator now and hang him if he were back alive. So satire to me, to me, the bellwethers for me are Voltaire. It's Candide, it's Swift, and it's Rabelais.
Yeah.
So those works to me are absolutely cathartic, and I read those works with the same. They cause the same balm on my soul that did Rachmaninoff and Bruch and Mahler, because they have it both ways. They're saying something absolutely profoundly interesting, and they are funny as fucking hell. Yeah. These are among the funniest books ever written. So those guys got my attention immediately,
Yeah, you got good roots there. That was beautiful and well put. So a screenwriting teacher told me once that a great film or great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Stanley Kubrick said the opposite. Great film, great art is when you can clearly not see the intention.
That's why one is teaching and the other one is Kubrick.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. But that's just a setup to what role does intention play in your creative process?
Well, again, help me. I'm not being argumentative, but when you say intention, what does Jerry mean by intention?
Yeah. Bruce, I want to give kudos to Sam for hooking us up, because Sam sort of did this too.
This is Sam Wasson.
Yeah, Sam Wasson, the great Sam Wasson. He basically psychoanalyzed a lot of my questions. I goes, that's what this is all about. Thank you. Because I'm not here because I'm like asking you questions. I'm here to figure out life and learn. But yeah, intention is like, here's the follow-up question, because it will flesh it out. Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. So I go, well, how much do you think of your audience when you're creating your art? And, it's like when you were 10 years old and you started to write, or at that young age, like, what was it that was driving you? You had read some people and you said, oh, I want to emulate or mimic this. Mm. And so your intention was, well, can I get as good as them? Or I get published? Or can I eventually steal one of my books from Papa Bach?
Yeah.
Yeah, like I'm going to go steal my own book.
Right. Well, I'm 67 next month. So I think I published my first book at 34 and writing since I was 13. in some form with long periods of time off, particularly in the beginning. So when you're young, things are quite different than when you are in the latter stage of your career. You want an audience. I don't have much of an audience now. In fact, my last book I released into the public domain because the publisher found the language to be problematic. It was the first time I'd ever been censored in my long career, 12 books. And in fact, Sam Wasson wound up publishing it. He started a publishing house called Felix Farmer, and they did a limited edition of 500 copies. But my book essentially lives on the internet now. And anyone, there's a company, if you go on Amazon and you want the book, there's a company that will publish the book. Instant publishing. I receive no profits deliberately. I just absolutely decided, disruptive, to overthrow my East Coast publishers, and they overthrew me as well. But I thought, what am I protecting at this stage of the game? My reputation? Is it my vanity? Am I going to be embarrassed that I released the book into the public domain? No, I was absolutely liberated. So when you're younger, you want a career. And yet, unless you are a writer that is completely attuned to marketing and one of those rare writers who connects with an audience and knows what that audience enjoys to read, then things go awry, you know. So my first book, I published much like Sam Wasson published my latest book. My first book was called Force Majeure, the Bud Wiggins stories. And a friend and I published it in a desktop edition of 1,000 copies. It sold out. It was even reviewed. It sold exclusively out of Book Soup. And I got a book deal at Random House based on those short stories. It was a 90-page book, and I wrote a novel that was extrapolated from those short stories. My next book was arguably my most successful book. It was called I'm Losing You. And after I'm Losing You, everyone was expecting another sort of apocalyptic Hollywood novel. Yeah. And I think 5 years later, I came out with a book that was much more Dickensian than it was Nathaniel West or Bruce Wagner. It was called I'll Let You Go. And I was vilified for it. And then I returned with a Hollywood book that I felt that after, it wasn't a misstep for me, but in terms of the publishers, a Hollywood book was more appropriate for my reputation and my readership. And that book did well. It was called Still Holding. But as you get older, you get further and further away from a game plan. And at a certain point, you do stop writing for anyone other than yourself. That may be an issue. You know, it may be problematic. There was a critic in Vanity Fair who called me a cult of one. So, you know, but you do what you do. You know, yeah. You do what you do. It's back to the quote about the Balinese, was it? That there's no word for art. They just do. You try to do the best you can, and you know, you sometimes have a feeling that you haven't, that whatever you have done, you always have a feeling that whatever you have done could have been something better. Yeah. But I don't believe that when Leonard Cohen sat down to write a song, he was thinking of his audience. You know, he once told me, we were talking about Joni Mitchell, And he was saying that Joni still has that disease. She worries about her legacy.
Wow.
And, I'm certainly not putting myself on the level of Leonard Cohen, but the idea of legacy to me is appalling. In this dream, the idea that this linear idea that one leaves in one's wake a legacy. We know how the fortunes of writers, what happens to them over the years. For a while, it's Proust, and then no one's heard of Proust. And then there's a resurgence of Proust. We know these things. The gentleman that wrote My Struggle, Carl Ove, I've forgotten his full name. Yeah. But he, for a while, it was nothing but him. Yeah. Literature was nothing but him. And now people, do you remember that moment in time when it was nothing but him? And then he may have a resurgence. I think he's a wonderful writer. But this idea of legacy, of leaving something as if to memorialize oneself is grotesque to me personally.
It's interesting, Bruce, because being a scholar of Frank Zappa, and I worked for him for 9.5 years, he didn't want to have this legacy thing. He's like, no, and he died young and left 60 albums in 30 years, double most of his peers. But he would say, I write this music for myself. If other people like it, great. I says, that was over romanticizing, because he lived in a consumer culture. He knew if he hit these notes and these lyrics that it might sell, so that he could do his disruptive art. So, I understand what you're saying, and it was well put, but I'd love to hear your reactions to Paul Schrader's line, the role of the artist is to attempt to sell out but fail.
Well, I'm a true artist then.
You mean according to Schrader?
No, but Schrader.
Wait, clarify what you said. You mean you never attempted to sell out, or?
Of course I did, but I would say this: never with my fiction.
Yeah.
But in movies, yes. Again, early on, I was. I was actively trying to write a comedy that would be of National Lampoon popularity,
right?
And absolutely failed. I tried to write television shows and failed. I really did try to sell out in terms of that, and my movie career has been very strange. I had written a script after maybe writing 20 scripts and getting well paid, but I was a cog in the wheel. I remember, just like so many people of my generation, you'd be serenaded at CAA. I was a hot writer. Mike Ovitz was in the room, and failed abysmally. I then decided to overthrow all of that. And I wrote a few scripts. One was called They Sleep by Night, right? Which was a play of on the title of the old movie, They Drive by Night.
Yeah.
And it was a completely surrealistic piece. And I showed it to the horror director, Wes Craven.
Yeah.
And somehow Wes Craven was so generous and liked it enough that when it came time for him to write the third Nightmare on Elm Street, Dream Warriors, he asked me to write it with him. So that's how my movie career began. And then I wrote something for Paul Bartel called Scenes from the Class Struggle in Beverly Hills. And it was many, many years later that I had written a script called Maps to the Stars and showed it to David Cronenberg, who I knew. And it must have been 10 years later where Cronenberg said he wanted to make the movie. And this was a movie that a script I'd written 10 or 15 years before. And he quickly assembled a group of actors, including Julianne Moore, and the movie fell apart. And David went on to make History of Violence, Eastern Promises, all kinds of things, and then was in Cannes with Robert Pattinson and Cosmopolis, and called me from Cannes and said, I want to make the movie. Robert's agreed to be in it. Now, my books are not books that are bought for movies. They're just they're too dark, too strange. Yeah. And the further anathema attached to them is that they're about Hollywood. And David was so important to me, and not just as a human being, but that he wanted to make this unfilmable script and bring all of his artistry to it. Now, I adapted a book of mine called I Met Someone, and Mike Figgis is directing that right now in Hong Kong with an Asian cast. So you never can predict the path you're going to take. This speaks to what we said earlier. This idea of control is non-existent. So intent is interesting because intent is something sacred. And I think that things can happen with the power of intent. I never demean intent or intention. There's something absolutely mystical about intending something. And whether that something comes to fruition or not is, again, beyond our control. But the exquisite thing is to have a purity of intent. That's almost enough.
Really well put, because it follows, you must have ESP, because the next question is, what was the motive of the cave artist? So I would just add, did you just answer it? Is what you just said in those last 10, 20 words the same, or is it different for you?
I think it's what I was talking about earlier. The sheer joy of writing inhabits an artist. The joy of scratching those images on a cave is not Kilroy to me. It's not I was here, but it's something outside of our ability to know.
Yeah. In all your accomplishments, how would you rate these three elements: luck, skill, and ambition? What played the biggest part, second and third?
Well, I think luck is, it really helps. So I would say luck is the most important thing, because you have people of great skill and ambition that don't have luck on their side. And those people either disappear or hang themselves, or we find a trove of their work after their death. So I would say that the most important element for me has been luck.
Poet said that poetry is outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
Prose poem.
We're talking about these directors, and Michael Apted just passed, and 35 years ago, I got to ask him this question because he was making a documentary on a Russian rock star, and it was right when MTV was breaking. I said, why do rock video makers feel so obliged to edit fast? It was like, if you know the history, it was like Abel Gance started Rapid Montage in 1922, but it really flourished when MTV came in. Marty Scorsese was saying, I cut my films faster because of MTV. Michael Apted told me, because we have learned to take in information faster. My question to you is, can we literally learn to take in information faster, or are we just brainwashed to believe we can?
Is it important to take information in faster is really the question,
It is.
Because, you have people that we've all sometimes flirted with the idea of learning how to speed read.
Yes.
And for a moment, your head is opened up to the what the brain can absorb on a page, you know. But this idea of speed reading is an absurdity, you know. So and of course, that kind of editing that you're talking about doesn't work for all forms. You certainly you wouldn't have that in Scorsese's movie The Silence. You know, it just doesn't work for all forms. It's dependent on form. You know, so these blanket statements, there's some truth to them, of course. You know, you look at television when the three cameras disappeared, and it was one camera that was moving. That was brand new to television. And it worked because it somehow fit the tenure of the time, you know. But if you want to do something more formal or more classical, then that's not appropriate. You know, it just depends upon what form you're working in.
Yeah, no, Bruce, you get it, because you answered a question with a question, and that's really what this is all about. So Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength, whereas we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness that you've incorporated to become a strength.
I would say, in terms of writing, it's letting go. My weakness was an inability to let go. And I remember when I was very young, and I was using a typewriter, and I would write a paragraph, and in a kind of OCD seizure, one word would be wrong, and I would have to retype the paragraph. This happened to me when I was practicing piano as well. Sometimes I practiced scales so assiduously that I never got to the piece that I was meant to be practicing. So this compulsive idea of failure and perfection, doing this dance of death, you know, was a weakness. So I think when I began to let go, and when you are at this craft for as long as I have been, if you have downtime, 2 days or a week or 3 weeks or 2 months, when you've become saturated and you can go no further in something that you're working on, I think a weakness in the past I would have tried to power through that. And now I see it as an essential part of the process. It's not a byproduct. It is an actual part of the writing process, the letting go.
Boy, thanks for being so articulate, and you're a wordsmith. You really use words how I aspire to. Like when I see Harold Bloom talk on you know, some TV show, I go, I wish I could be as smart as him, you know. But this is fun. George Manupelli's a experimental filmmaker who started the Ann Arbor Film Festival 60 years ago, the longest running experimental film festival. His mantra is ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas says there is no self-expression. And Cecil Taylor, the great jazz pianist, says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. Is art making more self-expression? I know it's both and it depends, but is it more self-expression or more we're vehicles for whatever dominant technology or culture is present?
No, I would say those 3 quotes are dead on, you know. I mean, Don Juan Matus, Carlos Castaneda's teacher, said, forget the self and you will fear nothing. The self, like thinking, clutters and deforms. vanity clutters and deforms.
Boy, that was wise. And this word fear, are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
It was a Leonard Cohen album, Old Ideas. I'm afraid of anything new or old. I'm just afraid, Jerry.
That is so beautiful. You'd say that. I wish I could find this. Here's Cage says, I can't understand why people are frightened by new ideas. I'm frightened by the old ones. And then Charles Ketting says this great one. People are very open-minded about new things as long as they know exactly like the old ones.
Yeah.
Yeah. So why is it so difficult for humans to consider the possibility that life may be pointless? I'm not saying it is. I'm saying it's hard for humans to consider that it might be pointless. Why?
Well, again, I think it's vanity,
Yeah.
Because people are offended. Again, these are just words, and words are so inadequate, I mean, I have an adoration of words, but at the same time, I know their utter inadequacy. So this idea of pointlessness is kind of this old notion, this old sort of existentialist, sort of collegiate question. Do you know what I mean? This idea of these are all opportunities and reinforcements that lead to the pursuit of silence and serenity. Because you could say, well, what is the point of serenity? Do you know? I think most people who talk about pointlessness are laboring under some sort of sophomoric fantasy that someone at some point will tell them, you meant something, you matter, and of course we do matter to those that love us and those we love, and by mattering to those that love us and those whom we love, we the ripples in the pond, the concentric circles expand, into the ether. But this idea, there are people that have lives well lived who never consider pointlessness. Yeah. They simply had lives well lived, and bravo. This bravo. Idea that trees or animals in the forest are contemplating the meaning of this world that they find themselves in, this dream that they find themselves in, is obscene to me. It's irrelevant.
Yeah, that evokes the great Captain Beefheart poem. The stars are matter, we are matter, but it doesn't matter.
Correct.
And in the silence thing, I would love to send you this essay I wrote on silence. And I love Thelonious Monk said, silence is the loudest sound in the universe. It's really great how you embrace these things that resonate with me. I appreciate it. So there's a line that goes, you create what you resist. Bob Goldthwait morphed it into you are what you hate. And again, back to Joyce, he says, it's a curious thing how your mind is super saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve. But Buñuel nailed it. Thank God I'm an atheist. How do you respond to this thought? You create what you resist. I'm not saying you, Bruce, but you know what I'm saying. This idea, one creates what one resists.
Well, I would say one reflects what one resists, not creates.
Yeah.
That's giving too much power and credence to the individual, But, there are all kinds of manners and form of resistance. Buñuel is my favorite filmmaker, by the way, of all time, you know. But there, you know, I remembered reading a quote about Christopher Hitchens that Christopher Hitchens said, where he said, "I wake up angry each morning." And I really understood that, and it resonated with me. But and Christopher Hitchens used anger in to sharpen, let's say, his antennae. You know, that was him as a sentient being. That was his predilection. We all have predilections. You know, some of us as artists are fiery and messy and unpredictable, and yet that thing that is channeled, it has a divinity to it. Others have a much more calm demeanor, much more stately, more silent in external appearance. We never know what is going on inside a person. And it really, it's not one size fits all, you know. You could say one dream fits all, but those who are the dreamers have distinct personalities. So it's this idea that again, a lot of these things are tropes of modern times that that, you know, don't feed the wolf, that stop feeding the wolf. These are new age tropes, you know, that is trying to kill you. You know what I mean? So some of them, they kind of trickle back to that. But I would say that back to what you were speaking about, our enemies, how to treat our enemies. We are often our worst enemies. So you have people that flail themselves for eternity, and are more brutal with themselves than their worst enemy could possibly be. So you do reflect those kind of you reflect resistance. It becomes you know, often it's like the Chinese finger puzzle, where the more you struggle, the more your fingers are entrapped. So the idea is to somehow enter into silence so that the fingers can be taken out, you know. But anger for me is a very helpful tool, you know. It's the master's tool, you know.
There you go. And you in the midst of that last talking, you reworded 2 aphorisms. You know, I've been working on this workshop playground thing where everybody brings 3 aphorisms to the table and we all try to reword them. And you did it twice, but I wanted to hear that one right. One's dream fits all. Did you spell it ONE''S, possessive? Or how did you say that? One dream fits all.
One dream fits all, like one size fits all.
One dream. Okay, that was great. So, Bruce, we're closing in on our 90 scheduled. Can you go a little more, or you want to just close out in 90? In like 10 or 15 more minutes, or what? It's your choice.
Listen, I'm an old guy, Jerry. You've got a lot of energy.
I'm your age, dude. But so how about
I think we can wrap it up at 7:30. I think that'd be perfect.
Okay, let's do these quick then. How do you find peace of mind?
The GPS.
If you were walking,
you know, the search is problematic. It finds you, you know, it finds you.
If you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Want some candy?
No, you know the joke. Want to buy some candy? On what occasion do you lie?
No, you don't ask the kid if he wants to buy candy. Jesus, Jerry. You just say, want some candy.
I know. I was disrupting an old joke. On what occasion do you lie? That's Prue's question, by the way.
I think not to hurt someone with a truth that is small. You know what I mean? What's the point?
Yeah. Bruce, can you forget to die?
Forget to die?
Yes.
Give me a little more.
Well, it's just this idea that came from a few modern thinkers, and it came up, and it's a question that's asked for years. I mean, it's just bottom line: can one forget to die? We don't have to put it in Bruce terms. Just can a person forget to die?
I don't think anyone is prepared for their death.
Yeah.
So I think everyone forgets to die.
Yeah.
But death doesn't forget.
Death doesn't. Yeah. If you were in a vat of vomit up to your neck and someone threw a bag of shit at your face, what would you do?
I'd say, may I have the bill? I'd be ready to leave that particular restaurant.
Tell me something good you never had and you never want.
I would say $100 million home above Paradise Cove, but I'd be lying because I really do want that.
On what occasion do they asked Tom Waits, on what occasion do you lie? He says, I didn't know I needed an occasion. But you got to hear the three answers I get. Tell me something good you never had and you never want, which I got from NLP. I didn't learn it. I just heard their question. Fame, money, and heroin. That's the three answers I mainly get. So,
well, yeah, I mean, I don't see a downside for any of those three.
Right. Joseph Boyce said, make the secrets productive. Lou Welsh, great beat poet and ad man, said, guard the secrets, constantly reveal them. But it was Thornton Wilder in 28 said, art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. It's been glorious being with you for the last 85 minutes, Bruce. You've laid your cards out on the table. I'm not insinuating you haven't answered this, but what's it really all about for you?
Is it just for the moment we live? What's it all about? It's all about the slow procession, the slow, joyous procession toward oblivion.
Yeah. That procession word is great because I'm a fan of second line. The New Orleans tradition where all the crazies are in back of the parade having the good time, and that's where all the great funk music came from. So we'll bring the great Clinton up. He's going to ask you a question, then I'll finish it off with two more. Bruce, it's been a delight. Really, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jerry. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. It's all yours, Clinton.
Yeah, no, it's been fantastic listening in. Listen, I was really transformative for me to have watched Oliver Stone's Wild Palms. So to have you here on the channel.
Oh, happy.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's wonderful. I really love the language that you laid out so elegantly, something that I have a very hard time wrapping my tongue around.
By the way, myself just elbowed me and said it's really Bruce Wagner's Wild Palms.
Right. And I entirely
I'm kidding.
Ah, yes, I know. Well, actually, the whole graphic novels on archive.org, or what was taken out of what seems to be the magazine.
Ah,
So
what's it called? Archive?
archive.org. I'll shoot you a link. I'll put one below for our YouTube viewers as well.
I'd love that. I'd love to see it.
Absolutely. So yeah, I loved the language you used. And so eloquently discussing something as vague as the social order being maintained by consensus reality of the water cooler sort, which is particular to cities. It's definitely a city thing. Is when you have to hang out with strangers all day that the entire culture seems to be made up of this ephemeral shared substance of dreams. And so, seeing as you're right in Hollywood, it's so fascinating. What do you think of looking at? I mean, it's really dark. I've been living in it for decades, but looking at the gradual replacement of more singular, centralized consensus realities into the sort of fractal of of groupings, where would you recommend the ground floor be for coming together amongst what's still a narcissism of very small differences amongst people who don't know all the common things that they still share together but still stand to lose?
You're talking about Hollywood or generally?
In the cultural production of discussing and maintaining the common ground between people experiencing the dissolution of the water cooler.
Well, it's really just kindness and simplicity. It's a backing away, I think, is where the common ground will be found. There's so much chatter now, and so many venues and platforms that there's no way to master them. But one can master a retreat, So a gentle retreat that is suffused by kindness and simplicity, really where we become more like the villagers that we were at one time, is the way out. That's the exit, Clinton,
Mm-hmm.
And from that, things do open up. One can actually get more information that way, but you have to get off the throne, this delusional throne that you are controlling the platform somehow, that you're controlling what you're seeing, and what's you're making choices. You are not making choices. The choices are being made for you. So the way to do that is, I think, is to retreat. Not an asocial retreat or an antisocial retreat, but just a retreat, a backing away into the village.
Regrouping.
Yeah.
That was brilliant, Clinton, because the water cooler is something we've studied, Clinton and I, with Bob Dobbs, in what's called phatic communication. That's called water cooler talk. And I would like to ask two more questions, Bruce. You've been really generous. What's the healthiest cultural shift you see developing today?
Well, the healthiest shift right now is that we are in the middle of a kind of global seizure. And I used to have migraines, and after I had a migraine and was in the emergency room and given Demerol, for a day or two, you have what they call, you're in a post-ictal state, which means post-seizure. And there's a kind of a jumpy peace that one feels. So I think it's too soon right now. The most heartening thing to me is that I'm all for seizures. And the aspect of this one is very dark, very dark. The lockdowns, the conspiracy, we're in a conspiratocracy, someone called this group of people conspiritualists. These are people, new age people that are adopting conspiracy theories. It is all a conspiracy. This existence is a conspiracy. But the idea of backing away is to back away from the conspiracy and the tyranny of the social norms, So that's my thoughts about that. I think it's too soon to say what good is going to come out of this, but this period. But good will definitely come out of it. It's human. We're in a cyclical. Our civilizations are cyclical, and sometimes they go for a generation of darkness or several generations of darkness. But there is always another side to that. There is an exit, and what that's going to look like, I have no idea.
Yeah. That's.
Right now, we're putting the tongue depressor in the epileptic's tongue, and the epileptic it won't open his mouth. So it's too soon.
Yeah. The spiral goes up sometimes and goes down. And someone said that conspiracy theories are just a form of literature criticism, which I always thought was hilarious. So, Bruce, in closing, thank you so much once again. And what gives you the most optimism?
Art, I think, it gives me great optimism. I mean, the books of Svetlana Alexievich, the Russian who won the Nobel Prize for Literature, with everyone acknowledging that what she writes is not fiction. She writes oral histories, and as unspeakable as what she writes about, one finds great beauty, tremendous catharsis and mystery and poetry, and that always brings me back to ground zero, So the comforts that art provides and will continue to provide amidst any kind of chaos, because it is a response of the human spirit, and just simple kindnesses. So you take those two, and there's an art to simple kindnesses. So those two things, how can one lose hope when those two things exist,
Yep. Bruce, we love your art. We appreciate it, and we appreciate your time and energy tonight. And I'll close with this great line that Marshall McLuhan said, that communication of the new is a miracle, but not impossible. So thanks for all this new communication tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Clinton. Thank you.